gun was already on the table before anyone said a word. It sat between the whiskey glasses and a half-eaten platter of John, its steel barrel catching the warm amber light that hung low over the private dining room. No one touched it. No one looked directly at it. But every man in the room understood what it was doing there. In Seoul's underworld, a gun placed on a table during a negotiation was not a threat. It was a philosophy, a reminder that the conversation had no ceiling, that if words didn't close the gap between these two factions tonight, something else would. 6 men sat around the lacquered table. 3 from the Eastern District's organization, 3 from the West. Between them, a territorial agreement that had been deteriorating for 6 weeks along the pressure points of the Incheon distribution route. A stretch of industrial road that moved more product per week than either side could afford to lose. At the head of the table sat Kang Min-Jae. He was 32 years old, and he carried it in the specific way of men who have not been young in a long time. Not old in his face but ancient in his eyes, in the particular stillness of them, in the way they moved over a room the way searchlights move over water. Slowly, thoroughly, missing nothing. He wore a dark charcoal suit. A thin scar ran the length of his left cheekbone, earned in a confrontation 6 years ago that he had survived and the other man had not. He had declined to have the scar removed, not out of sentiment but because he had noticed, after it appeared, that men gave him more space in a room, more silence, more compliance. The scar was, in that sense, an asset. One hand rested flat on the table. The other held a glass of water he had not yet drunk. He had not spoken since the meeting began, which was 40 minutes ago, and the men across from him had been filling the silence with increasing desperation. The Incheon route belongs to us. The speaker was Park Sung-ho, heavyset, a gold watch on his left wrist that caught the light on every sentence. He was the Eastern faction's lead negotiator and senior enforcer, which meant he had been chosen tonight because he was both persuasive and willing to make good on a threat. Your men were seen operating there on 3 separate nights last week. 3 nights. We have photographs. He slid a manila envelope across the table. We want an explanation, and we want a withdrawal date. Min-Jae looked at the envelope. He did not open it. Park waited, then continued. Do you intend to respond or? I'm thinking, Min-Jae said. His voice was very quiet. This was not diffidence. A quiet voice in a room full of dangerous men is the loudest thing in it, because it means the speaker has nothing to prove. Every man at the table understood this and adjusted accordingly. Dae-hyun, Min-Jae's lieutenant, lean, nervous, wearing glasses that he cleaned too often when he was stressed, which was most of the time, leaned slightly forward in his chair. Mr. Kang is reviewing the situation. Any assertions about? I didn't ask for a spokesman, Park said flatly. I asked your boss a direct question. And you'll receive a direct answer, Dae-hyun said with more steadiness than he felt. When he has finished thinking, the room went tight. 2 of the Eastern faction men shifted in their chairs. One of Min-Jae's bodyguards near the wall moved his right hand slightly closer to his hip. The gun on the table sat very still and said nothing and didn't need to. Min-Jae opened his mouth. And then the violin started. It came from the main restaurant, from beyond the heavy wooden partition that separated the private room from the ordinary dining area. A single note first, long and searching, carrying the kind of longing that seems to come from somewhere more fundamental than a person. Then a second note joined it. Then the notes began to find each other, and a melody emerged. Unannounced, unhurried, completely indifferent to everything happening 20 meters away. It was extraordinary. Not beautiful in the way that background music in a restaurant is beautiful, pleasant, ambient, designed to be ignored. Beautiful in the way that stops you. The way that walks directly into your chest without asking permission and rearranges something in there without explaining what it's changed. Park Sung-ho stopped mid-breath. The Eastern faction man to his right set his whiskey glass down with exaggerated care, as if afraid the sound would interrupt something. Dae-hyun's restless fingers went completely still. One of Min-Jae's men leaned toward him, mouth close to his ear. Boss, he whispered carefully. Should we make her stop? Min-Jae did not answer immediately. What he did instead was something no one in that room had seen him do before. The tension in his jaw, which had been locked in the particular configuration of a man managing his capacity for violence, released. Slowly, like a door that had been held shut for years finally being allowed to swing. His eyes shifted from the envelope on the table toward the sound of the violin. Not with suspicion. Not with calculation. With the expression of a man who has heard, from somewhere he didn't expect, the sound of something he forgot existed. He turned his head toward the music. Boss, Dae-hyun repeated, very softly. Let her play, Min-Jae said. Those 3 words ended the meeting's momentum more completely than any threat could have. Park Sung-ho looked at Min-Jae with an expression that was equal parts bafflement and something close to unease. He had spent years studying Kang Min-Jae's patterns, his pressure points, his negotiating strategies, his responses to confrontation. A violin had never been on the list. The meeting resumed eventually, distantly, like a train that had been stopped and now started again without quite recovering its speed. Conclusions were reached. An interim agreement was drafted. The gun was put back in someone's jacket. But through all of it, Min-Jae's attention was divided between the table and the sound from the other side of the wall. Out in the main restaurant, seated on a low raised platform near the entrance, playing completely inside the music and absolutely unaware of who was listening, Amara Johnson played on. She was 26 years old and had been blind since she was 11. The accident happened on a Tuesday in late October, outside her grandmother's house in Atlanta's West Side neighborhood. A car that had run a red light. A rainy evening. The specific kind of ordinary Tuesday that has no business being the day that changes everything, and yet, she had recovered physically within 3 months. The loss of sight was permanent. She had grieved comprehensively, then gotten back up. This sounds simple when stated that plainly, but it had not been simple. It had been months of fury and despair and the particular helplessness of 11 years old and newly navigating a world that had not, in its design, particularly accounted for her. It had been learning to read Braille, to use a cane, to orient herself in space through sound and texture and memory. It had been tolerating the pity of people who meant well and still managed to make her feel like she had been reduced to her condition rather than remaining the person she had been before it. But the thing that cut through the grief, the thing that had always cut through it when she let it, was the violin. She had started playing at age 7, for years before the accident, under the instruction of a church music director named Mrs. Coleman who had seen something in Amara's hands when she first picked up a bow and had pushed her parents to take the lessons seriously. By 11, she was genuinely talented. After the accident, when she returned to the instrument, tentatively, tearfully, her fingers searching for the fingerboard through memory alone, she discovered something she hadn't expected. She discovered she was better. Not immediately, but over time and with increasing conviction. Because the things that had previously competed with the music for her attention, the visual spectacle of performance, the faces of the audience, the sheet music on the stand, the distraction of the room around her, were gone. There was only the sound now. Only the bow on the string and the resonance inside the instrument and the air between the music and whoever was listening. She had been stripped of everything extraneous and what remained was exactly the thing she needed. She graduated from her Atlanta Music Conservatory at 23 with a performance distinction that her professors competed gently to claim credit for. She applied for the Seoul scholarship on the advice of a professor who believed that being forced out of your comfort zone in every direction at once, country, culture, language, environment, was the fastest route to artistic maturity. Amara had agreed, which surprised the professor slightly, since most of her students required more persuading. She had been rejected the first time she applied. She appealed. The appeals process took 3 months and required her to submit additional recordings, 2 additional letters of recommendation, and a written statement about her artistic intentions that her academic advisor privately described as the most cogent thing he had read from an applicant in 15 years of reviewing them. She was accepted on the appeal. She arrived in Seoul in the early spring of the previous year with 2 suitcases, a violin case, a 4-phrase vocabulary in Korean, and no uncertainty whatsoever. Music lets me see the world in ways sight never could, she had told a journalist who'd done a small feature on her for an Atlanta arts magazine. The journalist had nodded warmly, assuming it was a metaphor. It was not a metaphor. She meant it in the specific technical way of someone who has spent 15 years developing their non-visual senses to compensate for what sight can no longer provide. The quality of a room's acoustics told her the room's size and shape. The particular way sound moved around objects told her where people were standing. Someone's breathing pattern was an accurate readout of their emotional state. Footsteps conveyed gender, weight, confidence, mood, urgency. She could identify the restaurant owner's approach from 30 feet away by the specific rhythm of his walk, faster on the right side because of an old knee injury. She could tell how many people were at the bar by the distribution of voices. She could hear Min-Jae coming from the street before he reached the restaurant door. In Seoul, her life was ordered and purposeful. A studio apartment in Mapo. 3 mornings a week of Korean language classes, where she was now conversational enough to argue cheerfully with her teacher about pronunciation. Afternoons at the university music department, preparing repertoire and attending seminars that she found challenging in the exact proportions she required. 6 evenings a week at Haewon Restaurant, performing for dinner crowds who had begun to follow her schedule online and plan their visits accordingly. She did not know that the restaurant's private dining room had been, for the past several weeks, the site of meetings between some of the most dangerous men in the city. She did not know this because the owner, a practical and diplomatic man, did not tell his restaurant staff anything about who booked the private room, and Amara had no reason to ask. She came in, she tuned up, she played. The music went where it went and reached what it reached. She had no idea it had reached someone like Kang Min-Jae. He came back the next night. He told Dae-hyun it was a follow-up assessment on the Incheon situation. He told himself something in the vicinity of the same thing. Dae-hyun looked at him with the expression of a man who was too professionally experienced and personally cautious to call his employer a liar, but who was recording his thoughts carefully for later review. They sat at a regular table in the main restaurant. Not the private room, which Min-Jae had not reserved, which was itself remarkable. A regular table. Like a regular person. Min-Jae ordered grilled galbi and ate some of it without tasting it, drank 2 cups of barley tea, and for the duration of both of Amara's sets sat in the particular quality of stillness that Dae-hyun had, in 4 years of working for him, never seen from him in a public venue. He came back the night after that. And the night after that. By the 5th night, the restaurant's floor staff had quietly noticed that the well-dressed, scar-faced man who never looked at the menu and always arrived before 8 o'clock was not there for the food. By the 7th, the owner had gently inquired with Dae-hyun whether Mr. Kang had any complaints or specific requests regarding the service, because he was very eager to ensure the experience remained satisfactory. Dae-hyun had assured him, with the pleasantness of someone who had developed a finely tuned ability to have conversations that contained no information, that everything was excellent. What was happening to Min-Jae during these evenings was something he did not have vocabulary for, because he had spent 12 years systematically dismantling the internal vocabulary that would have been useful here. But the experience, if translated into something observable, looked like this. For the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, he was in a room and not managing it. He was not assessing exits. He was not cataloging everyone present. He was not running the automatic calculations of risk and advantage and leverage that constituted his baseline state of consciousness. He was just listening, existing, present in a moment the way people who have not been in his business can be present in moments, without the constant hum of threat assessment underneath every second. The music did this to him. He did not analyze why. He had a practitioner's relationship with useful things. If something works, you continue doing it until it stops working or someone makes you stop. He had not yet attempted to meet her. He had made, in fact, a deliberate decision not to, though he wouldn't have described it to himself as deliberate. He just hadn't introduced himself. That was all. He was a man who attended a restaurant and listened to a violinist, and that was the complete circumference of the thing, and it would continue in this clean, bounded form indefinitely. He had not counted on Amara's cane finding his chair leg on a Thursday evening in early October. She was moving through the restaurant toward the back exit with the efficiency of 3 months of memorized pathways when the cane touched something that should not have been in her route. Her reading of the situation was immediate. A chair leg, positioned approximately 8 inches further south than the table it belonged to should have placed it, which meant either the table had been moved or someone was sitting sideways. She adjusted left. And in adjusting left, she walked directly into the human being attached to the chair. Her shoulder connected with something firm, warm, and stable. Expensive fabric. A faint scent. Clean, austere, cedarwood and something mineral. The person did not make the usual sound. The surprised intake of breath. The slightly panicked movement backward. The verbal stumble of someone unexpectedly in contact with a blind woman's cane. The person simply absorbed the contact and was still. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said. In Korean first, then English. "I misjudged the table position. Are you all right?" "Fine," the man said. She registered his voice the way she registered all voices on first contact. Like a fingerprint. Baritone, though not deep. Controlled, not in the way of someone suppressing emotion, but in the way of someone for whom that precise level of expression is the natural setting. Seoul-accented Korean with no regional inflection she could detect, which meant either a Seoulite or someone who had been in the city long enough for it to overwrite wherever he'd started. "Are you sure?" she pressed. "My cane should have caught that before I did." "You play the violin," he said. She stilled. "I do. Every night this week." She turned toward him. Not fully. She didn't have a face to orient toward, but enough to signal that she was giving him her attention rather than the route to the exit. "6 nights a week, actually. Tonight was my last set." A pause. "You've been here every night this week?" "Most of them," he said. She heard the hesitation in it, the fraction of a second where he had weighed the honesty of the answer against the information it released, and chosen the honesty. It was a small thing. She noted it. "The food must be extraordinary," she said. The exhale that came back to her was the beginning of a laugh that had been stopped just before it could become one. Just the breath of it, the almost. It lasted less than a second. She catalogued it precisely. "The tea is acceptable," he said. "High praise. And the music." Better than the tea. That is the most qualified compliment I have ever received, she said. And I have received some very qualified compliments. She shifted the violin case on her back. I'm Amara. The pause before his answer was 3 seconds. She counted them. Min-Jae, he said. Behind and to the left of him, Dae-hyun had stopped moving entirely. The bodyguard positioned near the wall had performed a subtle recalculation of the room. In the hierarchy of extraordinary things Kang Min-Jae had done in 4 years, introducing himself by his actual first name to an unknown stranger ranked, conservatively, in the top 3. Min-Jae, she repeated, working the syllables. Am I getting the pronunciation? Close enough. I'll take it. I'm still fighting with the tones. My teacher says I'm improving, but she says it like she's trying to convince herself. She smiled. Can I ask you something? You can ask. When you realized I was blind, what did you think? You can be honest. Most people think one of about 4 things, and I've heard them all. He considered this with what she would come to recognize as his real thinking pause. Not the measuring pause he used when deciding how much to share, but the longer, quieter pause of someone actually working through a genuine answer. I thought you navigate very efficiently, he said, and that the restaurant staff should move the tables back to their original positions. She laughed. Not the polite laugh, the real one. That's the most practical answer anyone has ever given me to that question. The usual ones are either I thought about how brave you must be, which is exhausting, or I didn't even notice, which is impossible. I noticed, he said, but you didn't make it strange. Why would I? Exactly, she said. Exactly that. She paused. Something in the quality of his stillness was interesting to her. The absence of the usual social performance around her condition, the slight over-attentiveness, the carefully widened personal space, the performance of being comfortable. He was simply comfortable. Or at minimum, his discomfort, if any, was an entirely private matter that he had not chosen to share with the air between them. You have a very calm presence, she said. You feel like someone kind. The silence that followed lasted long enough that she wondered briefly if she'd overstepped. She hadn't, but she couldn't have known what the silence meant. That across from her, Kang Min-Jae, whose name was spoken in the Eastern faction circles as a warning to junior members, whose face had been described in an internal police assessment as conveying deliberate menace, was sitting with the word kind resting on him like something he'd found in a box he'd been certain was empty. I should let you go, she said. I need the back exit. My owner usually has his driver waiting, but tonight's timing was off, and I'm not fully certain of the bus route from this corner in the dark. I'll walk you out, Min-Jae said. He stood before the sentence finished. The street received them with the particular indifference of late-night Seoul in October. People moving with the specific purposefulness of people who know where they're going and would like to get there before it gets any colder. The food cart on the corner was still open. The smell of tteokbokki moved through the air. Distant traffic provided a low, steady baseline that Amara used to orient herself the moment they stepped onto the sidewalk. Min-Jae walked on her right, which was correct, because her cane operated on the left and she'd learned that most people chose the wrong side without being told. He said nothing about this. He simply chose correctly without commentary. You've never walked with a blind person, she said, testing. No. Then how did you know to stay on the right? You held the cane in your left hand in the restaurant. She nodded slowly. He was observant in the way that people who spend a great deal of time assessing rooms and people were observant. Total and automatic, the observations arriving without apparent effort. She filed this away. What part of Seoul are you in when you're not at a restaurant drinking adequate tea? She asked. Different places. That's cryptic. I travel for work. The import-export business. Yes. What do you import? He was quiet for a moment. Various things. And export. Various other things. She smiled at the pavement in front of her. You are extremely committed to being vague. I find it's cleaner, he said. Most people who find vagueness cleaner are either very private or have something specific they'd prefer not to discuss. I'm going to assume you're private. You can assume that, he said. They walked half a block in silence. It was not the uncomfortable silence of people who don't know each other well enough yet. It was the more interesting silence of people who are discovering that they don't need to fill the space. She registered this. Why Korea? He said suddenly. The question surprised her. Not its content but its quality, direct, unhedged. The question of someone who actually wanted to know rather than someone maintaining the social obligation of conversation. The scholarship existed and I applied, she said. And I'd read about Korean music traditions. The heegeum specifically, the two-stringed fiddle. The sound of it was the first thing that made me think. There are instruments I haven't touched yet. Techniques I haven't studied. Ways of understanding the bow that I won't find if I stay in Atlanta. She paused. And I needed to be uncomfortable for a while. The most important growth I've ever done musically happened when I was most uncomfortable. When did you decide that? He said. When I was 11, she said simply. A pause. The accident. You know about that. The restaurant owner mentioned it once. He's proud to employ you. She smiled. He's kind. Yes. The accident. It was the worst thing that's happened to me, and also the thing that made me who I am. I spent a long time angry about that contradiction. Eventually I stopped being angry about it and just let both things be true. Min-Jae said nothing for a moment. Then, that seems difficult. It was, she said. But difficulty and impossibility are different things. I used to confuse them. I don't anymore. They had reached the bus stop. She turned toward him. Thank you for walking with me, she said. You didn't have to. I know, he said. Will you be at the restaurant tomorrow? A pause. Probably. Then I'll play something for you, she said. There's a piece I've been working through, Bartok. Very difficult. I'm not ready to perform it yet, but I like to test it in front of an audience to find where it breaks. You'd be good for that. Why? Because you listen properly, she said. Most people perform listening. You actually do it. She turned toward the bus stop. Good night, Mr. Quiet. What? Until I can say your name correctly, she said. That's what you are. Good night. She boarded the bus. Pulled away. Min-Jae remained on the corner longer than the situation required. Dae-hyun appeared at his shoulder with the careful timing of a man who has been maintaining a precise distance. Sir, Dae-hyun said. The Incheon follow-up is scheduled for 9 a.m. Move it to 11, Min-Jae said, watching the bus until it turned the corner and was gone. October became November. Their evenings developed a structure that neither of them had explicitly arranged and both of them had begun to rely on. He arrived before 8. He ate, though the food remained secondary. He listened to both sets. After the second set ended and the restaurant's late crowd thinned, she would find him, or more accurately, she would walk toward the table where she knew he would be, because she had long since memorized the precise frequency of his presence in the room, and they would sit for an hour before he walked her to the bus stop. They talked. This was the remarkable thing. Not the pleasant, surface-skimming talk of two people filling time, but the real kind, the kind that arrives when two people discover that the other person is interested in the actual content of their experience rather than its social presentation. She told him about her grandmother's house, which had been the center of her childhood world. The deep porch, the neighborhood sounds in summer, the smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings. She told him about the moment she had decided, at 13, that pity was the thing she was least willing to accept from the world, and had organized her entire personality in resistance to it. She told him about the professor in Atlanta who had pushed her in rehearsals until she wept from frustration and then said, "Now play again," because the frustration was in the way, and how she had played again and understood what he meant. She told him about loneliness, which surprised her when she found herself telling him. She wasn't someone who shared that easily, but there was something in his listening, the quality of it, the absence of performance, that made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. Seoul is not easy to be foreign in, she said one evening. People are kind, but they are also very clear about what is inside and what is outside. And I am so entirely, visibly outside that sometimes I wonder what I thought I was doing coming here. But you stay, he said. I stay, she agreed. Because the music program is extraordinary and because every time something is hard I get better at it. And because, she hesitated. Because Seoul has given me some things I didn't expect. He waited. People I didn't expect, she said more quietly. He didn't respond to this directly. But when they reached the bus stop that night he said, "I'll be here tomorrow," without her asking, which was its own kind of response. He told her very little about himself in return. This was noted and did not go unaddressed. "You know that I know you're not telling me something," she said, on a Wednesday in mid-November, sitting across from him at the outdoor table with tea going cold between her hands. The city was sending up its nighttime sounds around them. "Most people aren't telling most other people something," he said. "That's a very elegant deflection," she said. "I'll give you a point for it. But you specifically, there is something very specific that you aren't telling me, and I can hear it every time your answer slows down at a certain kind of question. It's not just privacy. It's something with more weight than privacy. You're very perceptive," he said. "Yes, and you're very evasive, and one of those things is useful in this conversation and one of them is not." She paused. "I'm not asking you to tell me. I just want you to know that I know. Whatever it is, I can hear it in you. I can hear how heavy it is." A pause. "You sound like someone who is carrying a great deal of darkness." The street sounds continued. A food delivery driver passed on a motorbike. Somewhere down the block, someone laughed at something. "Yes," Min-Jae said. "Just that. Just the single word." But Amara registered its weight, the way a one-word admission from someone who never admits anything can be more significant than a paragraph from anyone else. "Does it feel permanent?" she asked. He thought about this. "I used to think so. And now?" Another long pause. "I'm less certain of that than I was." She reached across the table and found his hand and squeezed it. The contact lasted 2 seconds. He did not move his hand away or lean into it. He simply received it, the way you receive something you've been offered that you don't quite know how to hold yet, but that you understand is valuable. "Good," she said. "Certainty about permanent darkness is the most useless kind of certainty." Oh Tae-suk received his intelligence in pieces and assembled them with the patience of a man who had been waiting for an advantage for a long time. The first piece. Kang Min-Jae had been observed at Haewon Restaurant 6 nights in 7 for 4 weeks straight. No meetings, no business, just attendance. The second piece. Min-Jae had been observed walking a woman to the bus stop at the end of the evening. The woman appeared to have a cane. The woman appeared to be non-Korean. The third piece. Min-Jae had, in the estimation of a driver named Choi who owed Tae-suk a significant debt, and was therefore useful, become different in some hard-to-specify way over the past 6 weeks. Less absent during meetings. More likely to call the evening early. Occasionally seen looking at his phone and not responding to messages. Oh Tae-suk combined these pieces into a picture and sat with it for 3 days. He was not impulsive. Impulsive men in his position had short careers. He confirmed the details through 2 more sources. He had someone identify the woman. Amara Johnson, American, student, blind since childhood, employed as a restaurant musician. No known connections to any organization. No protective relationships. A lone foreign woman who played the violin and rode the bus home. The picture was clear. Kang Min-Jae, who had been, for years, an impenetrable fortress specifically because he had no one and nothing outside of his own organization that could be used as leverage, had developed, for the first time in anyone's memory, an attachment. An attachment who was entirely unprotected. An attachment who had no idea what she was attached to. Tae-suk's intention was not permanent. He wasn't looking to create a corpse. That was too loud, too unpredictable. What he wanted was a conversation. A conversation that began with, "We have someone you appear to care about," and ended with significant territorial concessions in the Gangnam corridor. A controlled application of leverage. Clean. He assembled a 4-man team and gave them instructions, and the instructions were, intercept the woman on her way out of the restaurant on the 3rd Tuesday of November. Be quiet. Be fast. Bring her to the Gangseo warehouse. Do not hurt her. Wait for contact. What the instructions did not account for was Min-Jae's intelligence network, which was significantly better than Tae-suk's, and which had already flagged an unusual pattern of interest in the restaurant and its occupants 3 days before the planned interception. Dae-hyun had brought this to Min-Jae on a Sunday evening with his glasses already cleaned 3 times, which was Dae-hyun's reliable signal that he was carrying information he did not want to deliver. Min-Jae had listened without speaking. Then he had said, "Who?" And Dae-hyun had told him, and Min-Jae had sat with this information for 90 seconds. Then he had said, "Tuesday night. I'll be there. At the restaurant? Outside it. When she leaves. Let her leave normally. Don't change anything she can feel." And Tae-suk's men? Min-Jae had looked at him with an expression that Dae-hyun correctly read as, "The answer to that question is implied by what I've already said." On the 3rd Tuesday of November, Amara left Haewon at 11:45. She was in good spirits. The owner had discussed an extended contract. She was thinking about a musical question she had been turning over for a week, a specific passage in the Bartok that kept resolving wrong, and what it would mean to let it resolve wrong on purpose. She was 30 meters from the restaurant when she heard the footsteps. Multiple sets. Converging. She had done enough solo night navigation in the past 15 years to understand immediately what the acoustic signature of that approach meant. She stopped. "Don't shout," a voice said, close on her left. Korean. Controlled. "Come with us. No one will hurt you." "Who are you?" she said. She was proud of her voice. It did not shake. "That doesn't matter. Come." A hand closed around her left arm. A second hand reached for her violin case. She pulled back hard, opened her mouth, and then the night came apart. She heard it rather than saw it, which meant she heard it in a way that most people in that situation would not. The specific physics of it, the sounds of bodies meeting bodies with the controlled efficiency of someone who knew exactly where to apply force and how much, the short half-sounds of men whose breath was taken by surprise, the rapid sequence of it. For sounds. 3.5 seconds. Silence. The hands on her arm and her case were gone. She stood on the sidewalk with her cane in front of her and her heart going at something close to twice its normal rate, and she did not move. Because moving without information in a situation she didn't understand seemed unwise. Then she heard footsteps she recognized. Quick. Then slowing to deliberate as they approached her. Amara. Min-Jae's voice. But something was different in it. The same voice, same timbre, same register. But the quietness of it was sitting on top of something she had not heard from him before. Something dense and absolutely certain of its own capabilities. Are you hurt? He said. No. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. She thought. What just happened? You're safe, he said. Min-Jae. She turned toward him. That is the third time I've been told not to worry about something in the last 4 minutes and no one has explained anything. Who were those men? Why did they grab me? How did you know to be? She stopped. The answer arrived before she finished the question. You knew, she said. You knew this was going to happen. The silence was the answer. How long have you known? She said. How long have you? She stopped again. Recalibrated. Her mind was moving fast, assembling a picture from pieces she had been holding separately for weeks. The answers that went carefully vague at certain questions. The measuring pauses. The fact that he had walked her home every night without being asked. The scholarship refund. The way restaurant staff reacted when he arrived, not with the deference of a regular customer but with a specific, careful quality she had interpreted as formality and was now reinterpreting as something different. Take me somewhere I can sit down, she said. And then tell me everything. The cafe was on a side street, near empty, playing soft music at low enough volume that she could hear him clearly across the small table. He had ordered her tea correctly, 3 teaspoons of honey without asking. This detail, when she noticed it, landed in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. The implications of it radiated outward. She wrapped both hands around the cup and waited. He told her. He did not tell her everything. He told her the shape of it, the nature of his organization, the scope of what he controlled and how. The words that were used for people in his position, not by him but by the people around him, and by the institutions that existed to contain them. He did not tell her about the gun on the table on the first night she played. He did not tell her about the things he had ordered done over the years that had no context that made them sound like anything other than what they were. He told her what she needed to know to understand why 4 men had tried to pull her off a sidewalk. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without inserting herself into the spaces between his sentences. When he finished, the rain had started. She could hear it on the cafe windows, the sound of it building slowly from a light tap to a more consistent rhythm. The men tonight, she said. Her voice was very even. They wanted to use me against you. Yes, because you and they, rival organizations. They saw they identified a pressure point. She absorbed this. You've been having me protected. Without telling me. Yes. Since when? Since I understood that my being in your proximity created risk for you. And the scholarship refund. His silence was its own confirmation. Min-Jae. She set her cup down. The motion was controlled. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it without managing the answer. Can you do that? I'll try, he said. The night we met, when you walked me to the bus. Were you already making a calculation about me? Was that? No, he said, quietly and without hesitation. How can I know that? You can't, he said. I don't have a way to prove it that would satisfy a reasonable standard of evidence. I can only tell you that the first night I heard you play, I had no intention of introducing myself. I came back the second night with the same non-intention. And by the time we met, I had not planned any of it. The protection came afterward, when I realized that my being there meant you needed it. Because you brought the danger to me. Yes. And you thought protecting me secretly was better than telling me the truth. A long pause. I thought telling you the truth would mean losing. He stopped. Corrected. I thought it would end something that I had not expected to be important to me. She was quiet for a moment. I feel stupid, she said. You're not. Let me finish. The evenness in her voice had an edge in it now. Not anger, something more careful than anger. The specific tone of a person assembling their thoughts under pressure and insisting on doing it correctly. I told myself I was reading you. I told myself that listening was as accurate as seeing, maybe more. And for 2 months I sat with you and talked with you and thought I was understanding who you were. And I was, in some ways. I know I was, because the things I understood feel real and I trust my own perception enough to stand behind it. But there was a very large thing I didn't understand, and I didn't understand it because you chose for me not to. Yes, he said. That's the part that's hard, she said. Not what you are. The choice. I know, he said. She heard something in those 2 words. Not performance. Not management. Just acknowledgement stripped of everything else. It did not fix anything. But it was honest, and she had learned over 26 years that honesty had a specific sound when it arrived, and this had that sound. The man who walks on the correct side and asks questions and listens properly, she said quietly. Is that real? Yes. And the other thing is also real. Yes. Both things, she said. Both things are you. Yes. She sat with this. The rain continued. The instrumental music in the cafe moved through something slow and searching. Eventually she said, I need to go home. He stood with her. At the door she paused, her hand on the frame. Min-Jae. Yes. The music, she said. You came back for the music. Yes, he said. She stood there another moment with the rain outside the door and the warmth of the cafe behind her. And then she said, I believe you, and stepped out into the night. He sat outside her building in his car until the light in her second-floor window appeared, stayed on for 32 minutes and went dark. Then he sat in the dark for another hour. Dae-hyun slept in the passenger seat, which was fine, because Min-Jae did not want to talk. He wanted to sit with something that had, over the past 6 hours, become entirely clear to him for the first time in years. He was tired, not in the body. His body had been managed and maintained with the disciplined practicality of a man who understood it as a professional instrument and could not afford for it to fail. Tired in a deeper place than that. Tired of the weight of what he had built and what it cost him to maintain it. Tired of Tuesday meetings and territorial negotiations and the elaborate mathematics of fear and compliance. Tired of being precisely the thing that had put a woman on a dark sidewalk being grabbed by men who wanted to use her as leverage. He thought about what she had said to him weeks ago. Do you want to become someone else? He thought about what he had said back. I think I forgot that was an option. He had meant it as a sad observation. A fact about a life. He had not meant it as a question. But sitting in the dark on this Mapo Street, he found that it had become one. Was it an option? There were reasons it should not be. The organization would resist. His rivals would interpret a withdrawal as weakness, would probe for opportunity. He knew too much to be released cleanly by anyone he had ever worked with. Leaving was not supposed to be possible for men in his position, and he had held this as truth for so long that it had stopped feeling like a circumstance and started feeling like a law of nature. But laws of nature are immutable. His circumstances were not. What he had, that most men in his position lacked, was administrative control, real, comprehensive control, built through years of being the most intelligent person in rooms that required intelligence. He controlled the ledgers. He controlled the infrastructure. He controlled the relationships, which meant that what he had built, he could also methodically and carefully deconstruct and transfer. It would take months. It would not be clean. There would be danger in it, significant danger, from people who would recognize what was happening and object to it violently. He took out his phone, sat with it, then called his attorney. Byun, he said when the man answered, sleep rough and cautious. I need you to begin preparing for a restructuring. Full financial restructuring and asset review. I'll explain the scope tomorrow. A pause. Sir, is everything? Tomorrow, Min-Jae said. Go back to sleep. He put the phone away. In the passenger seat, Dae-hyun had woken slightly. Sir? He said, not fully there. It's fine, Min-Jae said. Go to sleep, Dae-hyun. What's happening? Min-Jae looked at the dark window of Amara's apartment. I'm making a decision, he said. You'll understand it soon. Took 4 months. The first month was documentation and preparation, working with Byun to map every financial thread that needed to be unwound, every operational relationship that needed to be transferred to new hands, every legal and illegal asset that needed to be addressed. It was methodical, exhausting work. Min-Jae did it with the same precision he had applied to building the thing in the first place, which was fitting. The second month involved the actual transfers of territory, of personnel, of the supply relationships that kept the operation running. Some of these conversations were straightforward. Some were not. There was one confrontation in a parking structure in Uedo that Min-Jae would not think about in detail later, not because he was not capable of sitting with it, but because some things are done for a reason and the reason is enough and the details are beside the point. Oh Tae-suk learned what was happening in early February. He did not react well. He sent messages. He made calls. He scheduled a meeting that Min-Jae declined to attend, then sent representatives to the meeting Min-Jae had agreed to instead. The representatives made the nature of his displeasure clear, in the specific coded language of the Seoul underworld that sounds like polite negotiation to anyone not fluent in it. Min-Jae responded also in coded language in a way that resolved the situation. The resolution was not gentle, but it was permanent. In the third month, he began the cautious and carefully managed process of providing certain information to a unit of the Seoul Metropolitan Police who had been working on the Eastern Faction case for 3 years. This required trust he did not extend easily and guarantees that were verbal rather than documented, which was a risk he calculated carefully before accepting. The information he provided was accurate. The arrests that resulted, in the second week of February, across 3 days, across the Eastern faction's operational infrastructure, were significant. By March, most of it was done. He stayed away from the restaurant throughout. This was the hardest part. Harder than the confrontations, harder than the legal complexity, harder than the sleepless weeks of administrative dismantling. He stayed away because going back, hearing her play, sitting in the presence of what he was working toward, felt like something he had not yet earned. He was building something. He would return when it was built. He thought about her constantly, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the patience of her listening, the specific laugh she reserved for things that were genuinely funny rather than merely polite, the 2 seconds of her hand on his. He thought about the Bartok she'd said she was testing, whether she'd performed it yet, how it had resolved, whether the passage that kept going wrong had found its way. He thought about the corner of her mouth when she'd said, "Good night, Mr. Quiet." He carried these things through the 4 months the way you carry something small but significant in your jacket pocket, aware of it constantly, checking on it periodically, making sure it was still there. In early March, Byun called to confirm the final financial structures were in place. "You're clean," Byun said, which was not entirely accurate because a man's history does not cease to exist when he restructures his finances, but it was accurate in the ways that mattered for the future. "Thank you," Min-Jae said. That evening, he looked up a concert listing he had known about for 2 weeks but had not allowed himself to look at until now. Amara Johnson, March 14th. Seoul Arts Center, Chamber Performance Hall. 7 p.m. He purchased 1 ticket. The hall was half full when he arrived, which was full by the standards of a chamber student concert on a Tuesday evening in March. He sat in the last row on the right side, which gave him a clear view of the stage and also of every exit, which was a habit he was not going to unlearn overnight and had stopped trying to. Daehyun was in the building somewhere. They had negotiated this. Daehyun would be present but not visible. Min-Jae would attend the concert like an ordinary person, which he was increasingly working toward being. The program listed 3 performers before intermission and 2 after. Amara was third. The first 2 performers were competent. The first, a young man with a cello, played Schumann with more technique than feeling. The second, a piano and clarinet duo, played Brahms with more feeling than technique. The audience applauded both with the warmth of an audience that is supportive by nature and not yet required to be genuinely moved. Then the lights shifted slightly, and Amara walked out. She wore burgundy. She walked to center stage with the posture that Min-Jae recognized, the posture of someone who trusts their body completely, whose relationship with the space their body occupies is one of absolute confidence rather than the self-consciousness that most people carry in their visible moments. She found the microphone stand by touch, oriented herself, accepted a single note from the pianist as a reference. She raised her bow, and then she played the Bartok. The Bartok Violin Sonata No. 1 is not an easy piece. It is not an immediately accessible piece. It begins in a place of searching rather than comfort, its first notes feeling their way toward a question it will spend 25 minutes answering. It requires a player who is not afraid to be uncomfortable in front of people, which is a rare quality, because most people, even very skilled ones, want to be seen as competent before they will allow themselves to be seen as struggling. Amara was not afraid of any of it. She played the searching opening as if the search were genuine, as if she were actually working something out in real time, in front of an audience, with the violin as her instrument of thinking. She played the urgent passages urgently, without holding back, without the technical caution that can make a student performance safe and lifeless. She played the devastated sections with a quality that Min-Jae recognized, in the specific way that people who have carried something heavy recognize it in someone else as real. The hall was completely silent throughout. 8 minutes in, somewhere in the first movement's middle section, Amara tilted her chin upward and turned her face toward the back of the hall. Not for a reason that could be explained by stage direction or performance convention. She simply turned. The way a person turns toward something they sense before they've consciously identified it. The way bodies respond to presence they've learned to recognize. She couldn't see him. The stage lighting created a bright island and the audience area was comparative darkness. She could not have identified him even if she'd been looking specifically. She turned toward the back row, and the corner of her mouth moved. Just the beginning of a smile. The small, private kind, the kind that isn't for the audience but that arrives anyway because the feeling underneath it is too real to stay entirely inside. She kept playing. The bow kept moving. The notes kept arriving with that extraordinary quality of something that costs the person playing it something genuine. But the small smile stayed. Min-Jae sat forward slightly without intending to. Around him, the audience was entirely absorbed in the music. No one was looking at the man in the last row on the right. No one saw his hands loosen on the armrests. No one saw his face do the thing it had been doing more frequently over the past 4 months, becoming readable in small increments, as if someone were very slowly, very carefully, giving it back to him. The Bartok ended in a place of hard-won resolution. Not easy resolution, not the kind that forgets what it cost, but the real kind, the kind that has come through the devastated passages and the urgent ones and the searching ones and arrived somewhere that makes space for everything it has been through without being defeated by it. The audience applause was immediate and full. Amara lowered her bow and straightened and bowed, and she was bright with a specific joy, the joy of someone who has played exactly as well as they intended to and knows it, who has tested a piece in front of an audience and found that it held, who has done the thing they came to do. In the back row, Min-Jae brought his hands together and applauded. He stayed in his seat while the hall emptied. He did not go backstage. He did not send a message. He had not told her he would be there, and he had decided before arriving that tonight was not the night for any of those things. Tonight was simply for being in the same space, for listening, for being present in a room where she was, without anything weighing on it. The program coordinator thanked the audience over the microphone. Min-Jae looked at the program in his hands and at her name, Amara Johnson, printed there in ordinary ink, third from the top, part of the world of music departments and concert schedules and artistic ambitions that had always existed in a different country from the one he'd spent 12 years in. He thought about a night in early October when he had been in a private dining room and a violin had come through a wall and stopped a room full of dangerous men. He had not understood at the time what it meant that the music had that power. He understood now. It meant that even men who have traded away most of their capacity for ordinary life retain, underneath all of it, something that still knows what beauty is, something that remembers, something that can, given the right conditions, be reached. She had reached him, through a wall, without knowing who was listening, without any calculation about what the listening would do to the listener. She had just played. He stood, folded the program with careful hands and put it in his inside jacket pocket, close to his chest. He walked down the aisle and out through the hall doors and down the steps of the Arts Center into the March night. The air had that specific quality of early Seoul spring, the cold not yet gone, the warmth not yet present, but something underneath both of them, some suggestion of green and forward motion, that made the cold feel temporary. He stood on the steps. Somewhere inside, he knew, she was receiving congratulations from professors and peers, being told in the precise language of people who know what they're talking about that what she had just done was exceptional. She was probably already thinking about what she'd practice tomorrow. She was probably already thinking about what came next. He pulled out his phone, turned it over in his hand. Then he put it away. Not tonight. There would be time. He had done the hardest thing he had ever done, and it was done, and the future was still being written, and some things needed time before they could be approached and not before. But she had smiled. In the middle of the Bartok on a dark stage without being able to see a single thing in the hall around her. She had turned toward the back row and smiled. And he did not think this was coincidence or accident. He thought it was exactly what she had always been able to do, perceive with a precision that embarrassed conventional sight, the presence of something that mattered. She had known he was there. He walked down the steps toward the street. He would have dinner somewhere, alone, which was fine. He would sleep, which he had recently gotten better at. He would call Byun in the morning about the next phase. He would continue becoming the person he was becoming, at the pace such things required, without trying to force it into a shape it wasn't ready for yet. And he would, when the time was right, walk back into a restaurant in the Mapo district, and sit at a table and listen to a violin. And she would know he was there. She always had. If the story moved you, you know what to do. Like this video. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below. Tell us, who moved you more, Amara or Min-Jae? And share the story with someone who needs to hear it. See you in the next one.